Hi, I'm Steelfo of Steelfo Speaks, and this week we are tackling the important issue of trading card games and predatory capitalism. So what makes predatory capitalism predatory, and how that relates to trading card games. Let's just dive straight in. Firstly, let's just talk about the TCG business model. So you start off with a product, so you have a game, either competitive or casual. You have Magic the Gathering on the competitive end through to stuff like Altered and stuff like that hasn't really come out as a competitive card game yet. They're focused on providing hobby and fun, similar to board games, but there are some key differences. The emphasis, of course, is not just on collecting, getting the cards, but you can also trade them, you can also build decks. So everyone who's listening to this channel should be familiar with what that is. In fact, every single TCG, it's what makes the TCG business model, is this element of randomness. So they all follow this gacha-like approach, arguably even older than gacha in a lot of the West, where booster packs come from a set pool, part of a set. You've seen some examples here from Pokemon. So a set will be Crown Zenith, which will have 200 individual cards in, and then those packs will contain a booster with select sets of those cards in, a random pool of them with varied drop rates for individual cards based on their rarity. So your rare card will only be 1 per pack, and then that will be picked from the pool of rares. Your commons will be 10 per pack, and they'll be picked from the pool of commons and super rares, etc., etc. That's fairly straightforward. You go into your local gaming store, you buy a pack, you open it of the set for the game you want, and you get a random set of cards. Obviously, if you want to collect the entire set, you need to open more packs or go to a single seller and buy those. This slide is called I'm Not a Communist, why TCGs work and why they don't. So let's just talk about the pros and be very honest, is that the main reason that TCGs work and other forms of card games, which we'll talk about later, don't, is the really low entry level. So to get into a card game, you need a few boosters, a cheap starter deck from the latest set. You can play one of the casual formats or modes, so like Pauper or Commoner if you're playing Flesh and Blood. And there's loads of different ways to attack a TCG, but at its basis, all you need to play a game is a few booster packs or 2 starter decks, or you buy 2 commander decks, for example, and just play them into each other. The entry level cost for a TCG is much lower than, say, buying a whole board game, though a board game will be cheaper in the long term. But also they're usually quite flexible, so you can build different decks and build different formats and things like that, which gives you a lot of reach with the product that you buy. That creates this broad range of affordability and levels, all through from me when I was a 9-year-old and my mum bought a box of the Portal starter set for Magic the Gathering in Toys R Us and brought it home. My brother played decks against each other with those decks over and over again before we got new cards like a year later, all the way through to where I am now, where I have multiple competitive decks for Flesh and Blood, and I have 2 commander decks, and I have all that other kind of stuff now, creating my level in Magic the Gathering as a casual commander player, my level in Flesh and Blood as a casually competitive player, and I've spent different amounts to get to those levels. My commander decks, one of them costs 40 quid and the other one was a starter, it cost 25. So, whereas in Flesh and Blood, my deck might be 200. That's good because it means that people can approach the game from different levels and spend different amounts. Also, just being honest, there is a lot more money in TCGs than other forms of gaming, probably due to the random nature. Booster packs are cheap, but that means that people buy a lot of them, especially when you consider draft and sealed as formats as well. And also the whole competitive nature of some of the games drives the cost of certain cards up, which therefore creates a singles market as well, which means that there is just more money sloshing about, as the single sellers know that they can buy a lot of cards and sell them for a little bit of a markup, and then get their money, and then you as a player don't have to spend as much money as you would have to buy the packs themselves. But that feeds into a whole ecosystem where more and more cards are being opened to fund all of those things. So generally TCGs make a lot more money than board games or other card game like equivalents, which creates a large funding pool for R&D and events and marketing. The cons are, of course, randomness. I've put up this play booster slot to give you an idea of exactly what we're talking about. The booster that you buy is going to have 6 commons. It's going to have, well, this one has a list slot. It has 3 uncommons. It has a rare or a mythic rare, a basic land, a non-foil wildcard, a foil wildcard, right? So there's lots of stuff going on in this booster. There's a lot of random elements there because each of these is drawing from a different pool. You're not going to get 2 mythic rares in the same booster. You're not going to get some games do have god boosters, but that's a whole different story. But really, it's just a random element. You open a booster, you're either going to win or lose. And a lot of the times now you are actually losing because, especially in modern Magic the Gathering, the price of an individual rare or mythic rare that isn't super powerful in the latest set is actually very, very low. Which means that in general, you're opening boosters and you're losing in the gambling. But all that money fuels into, the game growing because the money is going back to the company. But you'll hear a lot of people, myself included, saying, unless you really enjoy opening boosters and you get a thrill, you should be buying singles because you win sometimes, but when you open enough sets, you lose every time. So the £4 you spend on one booster, or if you buy a whole box for £80, you could just buy 3 copies of the rare you need for £15 each, and you're still saving £15 of cash if that box is a loss, right? And if it's not a loss, then great, but you lose a lot on boosters. The other con is, of course, that because all of these boosters are being opened, the desired cards are the ones that are worth money. And if the set is not, say, full of desired cards, if there's only 1 or 2 hits, then the risk of opening that set becomes much higher. And therefore, those desired cards are actually even more expensive because there isn't a lot of value in those boxes to balance it out. So you can create a situation where cards can balloon in value, which can create a lot of problems for the secondary market. You also have just a general inability to keep all cards in print. So the necessary nature of a TCG system is that you're printing new cards in boosters 3 to 4 times a year. And in order to do that and have the game feeling fresh, you can't keep the cards from 10 years ago still in print, which means you either have to get rid of them in legality or you have to reprint them. When you reprint them, it devalues the ones that already existed unless your player base has grown massively. If you rotate them, it often makes them worth nothing because they're no longer valid in the main format of the game, and the value drastically drops because the competitive players don't want to buy them anymore. So you can't keep all the cards in print, which leads to difficult decisions. The other con, which is becoming very apparent in Magic the Gathering at the moment, and is less so in games like Flesh and Blood where they're still growing, but in player base wise, so they can keep just selling more of the sets that they print rather than selling more sets. But when you have a game that reaches its late stage, I'm not saying it's over, but I'm saying it's reached a full stage of market penetration and development, Magic is finding it harder to get new players while retaining the same level of old players. A lot of its old players age out or get fatigued with the product. And a lot of the new players coming in don't necessarily replace the full range of those people. So to increase revenue for a TCG, you have 2 options. You either increase the amount of people who are buying your product, so increase the player base, which works for new games like One Piece and Flesh and Blood because they're growing. Or you have to sell the people who are currently buying your product more products, right? And that's what Magic is trying to do. In addition with drawing in new players, they're also trying to sell more SKUs to their existing players. Of course, that has a lot of knock-on effects, which is why it's in the cons list, in terms of fatigue, in terms of pricing people out of keeping up with the game. If there were used to be, say, 4 sets a year that you were buying and now there's 6, suddenly you have to start saying, do I have the budget for that, especially in the current economic crisis? So that can create a lot of problems. But in general, the TCG market, and the reason that TCGs are the preferred card game market, is that they provide a low entry level, they provide a broad range of affordability and levels of playing the game, and that random element, while it has some drawbacks, does actually provide a bit of a fun mini game and a collecting game and a trading game that a lot of people do enjoy. So those things combined kind of creates that reason that TCGs are so successful and they are so sticky. They're also highly abusable. right? And that's just important to focus on just for a second before we get into the broader discussion, because we'll talk about things like artificial scarcity and fear of missing out later on. But just to highlight that they are highly abusable. So if you tinker with the drop rates in these boosters, right? So you make certain mythic rares rarer and certain commons less common, suddenly the price profile of all of those cards becomes drastically different. So if you accidentally short print something, it could be worth 2 to 3 times what it was before. I've already said before that if you mistake the value within a box, so say you make one card in the set that everyone wants 4 of, casual and competitive, and it's worth £30, and no other rare in that set is worth £30. There's none, say, over £2. Actually, what happens is that the value of those non-desired rares actually deflates much faster, and the value of that desired rare then shoots up because people stop opening the product because it becomes a less safe gamble. And one of the big things that the people who are selling cards and singles talk about is the expected value of opening a box. So they need to know, with their markup on individual cards, which is usually 20% or so, that they can sell enough of those individual cards to get value from opening, say, 3 cases or 10 cases of FAB, right? And it evens out the more you open. If the set is designed right, the more boxes you open, the more it evens out. Because while you might have randomness in 1 case or even 2, when you open 10, the kind of bell curve for value and what you've opened, hits versus non-hits, needs to even out. Now, if you've got 1 hit and no others, then that bell curve will never be reached, and the amount that you have to open in order to get value and effective value from opening all of those boxes becomes a crazily number of boxes, and people stop doing it, right? So there's a lot of things that can be tweaked in here, and recently we've seen the addition of a lot more like above mythic rare. So here's like there's only 100 in the set, or this is a serialized 1 of 100 card, right? And those become a whole other level of kind of predatory in a sense, because when this idea initially came out, anyone could really own any card. And what I mean by that is that there's a rare in a set and it comes out, but when that set's printed, the rare is usually only worth like £10 or £20 or £30 max. So if you bought 3 of them, you own that card, right? And there's only really 2 versions of the card. Traditionally, you have a rare version, you have a normal version, and you have a rainbow foil version. And a lot of people don't like the rainbow foil ones because they pringle, and that's a whole other story. They just bend when the humidity changes, which causes a lot of problems. But the point to remember is that for a long time, any player could collect any version of a card. And recently, what we've seen, and this ties into what we'll talk about later with FOMO, is the addition of these hyper rare versions of these cards, which you cannot really own. So there is, for example, a 1 of 100 The One Ring serialized numbered card, which is owned by one collector out there in the world. And you can't own that, and it's got like a slightly different treatment on it. You can obviously own a copy of the One Ring with similar art, but you can't own that card. And that was a big shift. And it does create an interesting layer of collectability. It does change the way that you feel about opening boosters. It does push more towards gambling, away from just this is what it's like to open a box and this is what you're going to open, and it being a regular and understood experience. And I think a lot of what the negativity about the gambling comes from when you add in these additional layers of rarity in cards is that it becomes much more gamble than it becomes safety, because a lot of people, again, we talk about price dilution, will open a lot more boxes searching for those special serialized super rare card, which then leads to a massive dilution and flooding the market of everything that isn't one of those cards, which brings the value of opening a box way down. Now you might think, okay, as a casual player, that's great because then the value of everything is way down. But the point is that as a casual player, you might want to open some boosters, or you might want to play a draft. And previously, there might be money cards that you could open in those boosters or in those drafts. You might occasionally win. The point is now we're moving to a paradigm where you don't win because the people who have opened way more to get that super serialized card have already ruined the market that you were going to sell your cards into. It's just something to think about when we're talking about randomness. Let's move on and let's just talk about alternatives to TCGs. And there's one specifically I want to highlight because it is really a card game. And that's the living card game. It's also just been called, like, the Eternal card game or the box set card game. Living card game specifically copyrighted by Fantasy Flight Games. And this is something that I don't know if they came up with, but they definitely pushed for a lot of their games. But an LCG is basically a set box containing every card that is within a certain release. So rather than buying Lord of the Rings, the Magic the Gathering set, or the Hunted for Flesh and Blood, you would buy the Hunted box, and you would get 3 of every single card in Hunted. So you wouldn't have any rarity or anything like that, though there are promos and alt art treatments and stuff that get given out at tournaments. But basically, the Hunted would come out, you'd pay £40, you'd get a copy of every card in the Hunted. And then when a new set came out, there would be a booster pack or a blister pack that also contained every single playable card for that set. And the product is very, very different because every player is sort of expected to own most, if not all, of the cards. The sets come out, the pack that comes out has cards for every color, every faction. You buy it, you take the ones from your faction, you might put the other ones in a box. But also, because it's specific SKUs without gambling, the sets often have slower rotation. The game often rotates out cards a lot less because essentially sales are slower. You don't expect people to adapt as fast, to buy the pack as quickly, and that means that you can't really cycle out the cards they bought as quickly. So that's kind of the basic model where there's set packs, you buy the pack, you have all the cards, and these packs are usually cheaper, and they contain all the cards. Just to get this out there straight away is that LCGs have never been as popular as entrenched TCGs. Legend of the Five Rings, its largest tournaments, 250, 350 people. Netrunner's about the same. I think it's about 300 people. And they never generate the same amount of money as a TCG does. And it's just important to acknowledge that. That's ultimately why these games fail. Historically, is that they don't generate enough money compared to a TCG. That means the design resources to keep developing the game to a high quality are never provided because the money is not there to pay enough designers, high quality designers, to keep the game going. The majority of the money is made by the company by selling the original core box rather than the expansions. And that means in turn that all of the marketing and events and stuff like that are automatically a step lower just because there's less money generated by the game. The other big thing we'll talk about in a second is just availability of the product, but that's a different story. So the pros, there is no random element. What you see is what you buy. You know exactly what's in a box, you buy it, and typically you have all of the cards. So there's a lot of flexibility there where most people own most of the cards. You can split it if different people aren't playing the same faction. And that leads to a very even competitive playing field. So like most people have most of the cards, so you don't have to worry about switching decks. There's no card availability as an obstacle to deck building. But that comes with some big cons. One of the big cons of that even playing field, of that flexibility, is that new players who are coming in can't buy a few boosters or a small starter deck. They have to buy quite a few cards to enter into the card pool. And that adds up quickly over time, because one of the things that LCGs have, and this is kind of like a chicken and egg scenario, right? So if you made an LCG of, say, Magic the Gathering, and Magic the Gathering transitioned to be an LCG, the amount of SKUs of products that would sell would be so much that they could keep the product design, the R&D, and the rotations going fast, and probably even keep up the same level ish. They make a lot less money, but the point is they'd sell a lot of it, so they would still make quite a lot of money. But you could probably keep up a similar cadence of printing sets, releasing them, rotating them, etc. But because these games launch smaller, they've always had to rotate slower because they don't want to lose players by banning their cards too quickly, and they don't have the design resources to pump out as many sets a year to match the cadence of a TCG, right? There's also less money available for R&D and marketing, which means the game grows slower in turn. So the real problem with LCGs isn't necessarily the business model, though it does create less money compared to a TCG, but a lot of it is just due to the way that impacts growth, and the way that growth then impacts the design of the game. It is also harder for the stores to maintain the SKUs of a single product in stock, because really it's like, I have a slow rotation, so this is lasting 5 years. I'm not going to have the product from 5 years ago on my shelf holding up space that no one's going to buy. It's easy enough to get in a box of a set of a TCG, sell it, discount the price, sell the next one, get it off the shelves. Whereas with LCGs, because a new player coming in is going to need to buy back into the catalog, it's hard to maintain those products on the shelves. And because everyone is buying all of the cards, people really do like to keep the complete sets. So there isn't really a large singles market either. Occasionally people do buy products and break them up and sell off singles, but mostly everyone is just buying the product, keeping the cards in a box, and there's not really an option or a way to buy single cards, right? So this all kind of feeds into it as well. Because all of these things, it's harder to ramp sales, it's harder to diversify products, it's harder to just pump more out there. You don't really gain the player base and the growth. And it is really hard to enter for new players. I mean, if you look at the legality list of Legend of the Five Rings, you could be talking about 3 or 4 years of product. You could be talking about 300 or 400 pounds. They can't rotate it faster because the sales aren't there. So new players getting in have to spend that much if they want to be competitive. It creates a bit of a problem. Whereas with a healthy singles market, which you can have in a TCG, you kind of can dilute that problem where someone could buy singles for a specific deck. You can also rotate faster. But it is just worth acknowledging there are alternatives to TCGs that are popular for various reasons. Netrunner is still going strong. Arkham Horror is still going on, but that's a co-op game. Legend of the Five Rings is dead now, unfortunately. Sad. But they do work. So let's just move on now to talk about capitalism and predatory natures. So what makes capitalism predatory? The first thing to acknowledge is that it's all about balance. So there's nothing wrong with a company designing a product, adding a markup on that product, and then delivering that product to you, right? They're using that money to pay themselves for a job well done and to build new things and work on the next product, right? That is a core tenet of good capitalism. What makes capitalism predatory? I say it's all about balance. It's profit margin that the company is receiving versus value provided. So increased price and increased profit margin at the company without providing better user experience is when capitalism becomes predatory. It's also when they start to use a lot of negative marketing techniques to create value that doesn't really exist. And I'm talking about fear of missing out. I'm talking about artificial scarcity, and I'm also talking about a rapidity of product releases combined with the previous 2 points to make you feel like you need to buy at a faster cadence. And a lot of that also ties into things like price fixing, where something is worth what it's worth because the company has told you it's worth that amount of money. But actually the production costs are so drastically different from the cost that you're paying to buy it that actually they're making a ton of margin and not really giving you the reward that you should have. And it's important to understand, it becomes predatory when things become about being for profit ahead of serving your consumer base the best experience that you can have. So what I mean is that a company should make money and they should grow, and that growth should allow them to hire new staff, get better offices, pay better designers, better work-life balance, better product, good roadmap, stability, expand to new regions, all those sorts of things. And when I'm talking about this, I do like to talk about where Legend Story Studios, the guys who make Flesh and Blood, are right now. They have started off with a very small team 5 years ago. They now have an office. I think they employ over 50 people. They have marketing teams, event teams, product management teams. They have multiple designers, developers. They just hired a new head of content for their streaming and social media strategies. They're taking that and they expanded into Japan and new markets with the capital they already had. So they're taking the money that they're generating. They're obviously getting paid reasonably well. I don't think any of these people are poor. And, we've heard from various discussions that the investors have done quite well from investing in that company. They've made money. But because a lot of that money is also being reinvested in more staff, more development, better art, all of those things that create a better TCG experience, that doesn't feel as predatory. Now, I will say there are some predatory practices that Flesh and Blood has been engaging in, and those are worth acknowledging as well. But on the whole, their primary goal at the moment is organic growth by investing in their company and their product to drive new customers. Because they, and it's important, they can do that because their main source of growth is new players and player retention, right? Versus something like Magic the Gathering, where obviously their new player pipeline is aggressive, but they also have to contend with large amounts of player loss, and they also have to try and increase their profit margin further by selling more to individual players. To finish off profitable customers, you can kind of track how this works. Customer feedback becomes more negative over time. They become more dissatisfied with the product. They feel like the product has gotten worse. There's a term called shittification, where someone gets a product into your hands, makes you really like it, and then makes the product worse. Commonly refers to tech companies, but it can work in anything. And then it's also just worth acknowledging like pro-customer initiatives being cut in favor of revenue growth. For example, I saw one today where there was a diversity-focused league, and Wizards of the Coast has decided to cut its power to award competitive event invites, I think is what I saw, which is purely a decision to take away something that has no value to the company because they can control the number of people attending an event massively. Giving away a couple of extra places is a negligible value, but obviously has a big impact on the community and feelings of acceptance within the community, right? That's the sort of thing we're talking about. Or, for example, when Magic the Gathering ended its in-person play event series. Obviously, COVID was happening as well, but they were doing it before COVID, and they didn't rush to bring it back. That was a choice to deprioritize spending money on events, which is a very positive customer experience, in favor of generating profit, because events are typically a loss-generating endeavor. They're a marketing endeavor. You spend money to run large events so that people can come and play your game and be competitive and feel like they're having the best weekend of their lives playing games, right? No one makes a great deal of money running TCG events, from what I know. The events companies obviously make a profit, but the company that makes the game doesn't make a value of it. But we're talking about the point where things become predatory is where the profit margins go up and the value provided starts to go down, is when they start to use negative marketing techniques and psychological techniques to create a buying experience where you feel compelled to buy, rather than one where you are naturally buying because of the quality of the product. And it's one where they increase the amount that they expect to purchase from you without giving you back an experience that matches the quality that you should expect. Okay, now what does this look like from a TCG perspective, right? Let's just talk quickly about that. So take Magic the Gathering. I say I got tired of Magic the Gathering when the number of products they were releasing every year became so much that every time I just finished getting excited about a set, the next set was already being spoiled and they were trying to build hype for it. And I was like, I haven't even had a chance to play with those cards. Because I'm one of those, I am time poor now, therefore I am aging out of your game, right? And okay, I'm playing a different TCG, and that's another reason I'm aging out of your game. But just in general, like, I was already aging out of Magic because there was too many new sets coming out. I was never going to play Standard again because I couldn't keep up with it. I didn't want to keep up with it. And then I felt like my Commander deck was being aged out because there just kept being new cards printed for it. And it didn't make sense not to play the new cards because they were like perfectly designed for my deck. But before that, I had loads of old janky cards that I'd found that kind of did exactly what I wanted, but it wasn't perfect. And now there's a perfect version of the jank that I feel like I have to play. You're kind of getting the problem. So keeping up with all of that just got me tired. So I decided to just put a lock. And I was watching Pleasant Kenobi, and he was saying, look, what you need to do is just put a lock on your Commander decks. Like, just say that's done, and I don't need to look at another card for it or buy anything else for it. It's just done. And that's what I did, and I've never been happier, because the second I did that, I opted out of the fast release schedule. I opted out of the continuous marketing. I opted out of people saying, oh, buy this product or it'll be gone by next year. All of that just started to disappear, and I found a massive psychological relief that now when I see Magic the Gathering, I don't have to look at it. I can if I want to, but I don't have to. And that's really what I'm talking about, is that there was a huge excitement in my life for new Magic the Gathering sets when there was a gentle but regular cadence of release, 3 to 4 sets a year, and I was playing with them regularly. The second that ramped up, it became a burden to remain engaged. And I felt like there was always pressure on me to be buying something new. It's like, well, okay, you've got your Lord of the Rings set now, but have you heard about our return to Kaladesh, or it's not called Kaladesh anymore. I can't remember what it's called, but they're changing the name of that. That's fine. And I felt that pressure was in there. And then the secret layer change happened, and it changed from being print on demand, you can buy one, if you buy one you get one, to you have to log in and buy one of, we're only printing 2,000, if you don't get one of those you can't have it. And I'm like, okay, well, I would really like a Storm or an Iron Man or something like that, but I didn't get in the window because I was at work, so I can't have one. And nothing turned me off from buying another Magic product more ever again than that experience, right? Because that's negative marketing, that's artificial scarcity, and that's FOMO. So that's how these things work in TCGs. It's the creation of a limited edition print run of a card that you have to buy within a certain window. It's going through sets so quickly that by the time, like, you might see marketing for a set 2 years ago, but it's already out of print and you can't buy any. It's saying, it's making a card that's so essential for every deck that everyone has to buy one, but it's a mythic super rare, so you can't actually get one unless you pay a lot of money, which means that single sellers will open those boxes, which funnels tons of money to the company. And it really is that increase in drive for profit margin at the expense of consumer experience. And you do see that in Wizards of the Coast a lot, especially in stuff like D&D, where they are very committed, and because they're a publicly traded company, they kind of have to be to that 5% profit margin increase every year. But it's very hard to imagine that the Magic the Gathering customer base can grow drastically more than it is, right? Because they have very high market saturation, and they have a lot of people who they're aging out, or they've burnt out, or have tried it and don't want to come back, or just don't have time for it anymore, and they don't necessarily match that with a whole load of new players, which means they really are squeezing to try and get their profit margin from their existing customers, as well as selling out to things like Marvel and stuff like that to get from new customers. And that creates a negative experience. And I think you can contrast that with newer card games that don't have that public traded company investor pressure bias, like Flesh and Blood. But also, I think to an extent, Pokemon has avoided this for years. You can buy a competitive Pokemon deck quite cheaply. There's always that chase super rare shiny version, but the base price of a Pokemon rare is not that high. So Pokemon manages it. Magic the Gathering is running off on its own direction. Flesh and Blood is still young. It'll be interesting to see what it does when it thinks it's hit market cap, but currently they're showing a lot of good signs. There are some predatory practices involved. There's now special event coins that you can only get if you spend X amount at the prize wall, at the merchandise booth at that specific event. So you can get challenge coins, but you have to spend £250 on merchandise at every single big Flesh and Blood event. There was a whole lot of stuff with like 5th anniversary packs, but you can only get them if you went to the World Championships in Osaka. So a lot of people felt like they've missed out on this 5th anniversary celebration. Yeah, it's hard to point out a lot. Like, Flesh and Blood is not doing a lot of predatory stuff yet. But, who knows with card games. But, Magic has a lot of them that are adding up, which is why I'm drawing on it for example. Sorry for you Magic fans. I do still like Magic. I do still have my Commander deck. It's Ruka, the Patient Professor. It's a mono-green, non-creature text stomp deck. I love it. But let's just talk about artificial scarcity. So artificial scarcity, lovely definition, creation of a limitation on the supply of an object when there is no material reason that supply needs to be limited. So it's me saying you can only buy this bottle of water to drink when there's a rainstorm outside. It's, you know, me saying diamonds are worth X amount of money because I said they are, and I'll only sell 500 diamonds a year, but I can mine 10,000 diamonds a year. I just choose not to. It's that kind of thing. So there's no reason that supply needs to be limited, but I'm creating a scarcity. And the example for TCGs is that the cost to print a single card, whether it's a super rare, a mythic rare, rainbow foil, is pennies. You know, it's really cheap. But some of those cards might end up being worth £300, right? Because there's a scarce amount of them. Now, let's just point out this is not a bad thing. It creates an environment where cards have value and can retain that value. It creates a fun collecting side of trading card games, and it is enjoyable, right? A little bit of artificial scarcity creates I have this and you don't. I can sell this to you. It gives value to the boosters, and boosters do need to have value inside them, right? I don't know what's happening with this reasons to play, not to play. I think that's from an old video, so just bear with me. Sorry for that. But boosters need to have value. There is a cost associated to printing a booster, designing it, obviously, shipping it, and putting it in your local game store, right? Those are not negligible costs, right? So, you know, printing an individual card is not worth much. Printing an entire set costs a lot of money. Art for an individual card isn't that much. Art for an individual set, I've heard quotes, it's around 100,000. You know, if you think about paying each artist, I think £1,000 per card was what was quoted before. I think it's gone up a little for some, and it's more for like special character pieces and things like that. Like, you know, if you need a character drawn by a specific artist who's always done it, etc. So, you know, the budget for sets, 250 cards, it could be 250,000. All these costs do add up, right? So booster packs have to have value, and they have to sell, and they have to sell in such a volume that pays for the local game store, pays for the shipping, pays for the designers, pays for the artists, and all of those kind of things. So to say that artificial scarcity is the problem is denying what the TCG model requires and what makes it so successful, which is a certain amount of artificial scarcity drives the entire industry, because it sells boosters and it gives money to all of those things. So it's not to say that artificial scarcity is a problem. Really, it becomes a problem when you talk about special printings, limited versions, and this whole idea of fear of missing out and pressure. So let's just talk about the good. People do crave gambling, right? They do. People like to open boosters. They like that feeling. And also, as we talked about before, it does bring that entry level way down due to the small price of an individual booster and a product, right? So it is possible to enter Magic the Gathering just playing a draft, right? A week for a tenner. Well, it used to be a tenner. I think it's gone up a bit now. The point is, that is good, right? It is good that it is cheap. It is good that this value fuels back into the entire ecosystem. It also allows people to win, though in general, as I said, people do lose if you're opening small amounts of product. Expect to lose by singles instead, but you can win. You can go to a draft, get a prize pack, and open a £200 full art, extended art, shiny version of a card. But the best thing that it does is it creates this gradient of players. Not every player needs to own every single card. That may sound like a bad thing, but I've already kind of explained with LCGs that when you have a situation where every player can buy every card, the necessary cost of that product that contains every card is higher than a booster. So the con is upfront cost versus gradient cost, where someone might buy a few boosters every week to draft and slowly build up a collection, versus saying, give me £40 now for this starter deck and then another 200 for every pack that you haven't got that's been out for the last 2 years, right? It's that gradient of entry which is very important, and not every player does need to own every single card. Ideally, there should be a balance of accessibility versus cost. So that means that the most expensive deck in your competitive field should be £200, which anyone with a £200 budget can go and buy that deck if they want to play it. Balancing that is really important. It's one of the places where Flesh and Blood is actually really failing at the moment, is controlling their artificial scarcity. They've got 1 or 2 cards. I think it's probably about 3 cards, like Command and Conquer, Codex of Frailty, Fiendar Spring Tunic, that are just underprinted or not haven't been reprinted enough. And the cost of those individual cards is causing, I would say, a big problem for the meta game, because there might be a competitive deck you want to play that plays 3 of each of those cards, so suddenly you're looking at an extra £200 over the next competitive deck just to build that deck. That is a problem. It will be addressed. They've just reprinted 1 of those cards. They will obviously reprint more of them, but currently they're in a problem where that dial of controlling artificial scarcity has just gone off a little bit, and they haven't reprinted certain cards they really need. So what is the bad of artificial scarcity? Well, you've got this first problem, which Magic the Gathering is now getting into, where there's too many versions of each card, and that's kind of diluting value. So it used to be pretty simple. You had, the regular version of the treatment of a card and the rainbow foil version. The rainbow foil version would be worth a little bit more. And then they add another gradient of a card above rainbow foil, which is like extended art rainbow foil. And that's okay, because you're buying either the regular version, which is the cheapest, the rainbow foil, which is the midpoint, or the super rare version of it, which is obviously a decent bit more expensive. Now we're into a situation where a card might have 5 or 6 versions. And what that does is the first version's value goes utterly into the floor, right? The second version's value is confusing. People don't know how much it's worth. They think they've got the 4th versions instead, and they try and price it as that, which gets them in trouble. It creates a lot of mental energy trying to figure out exactly what version you've got. The mid version no one really wants because it's not good or bad. The 4th version is good. People buy it because they can't afford the best version. And the best version is meteoric in prices, and most people can't afford to buy it. What it does is create a lot of mental energy and like value confusion, and often the lowest version is too cheap. And what I mean by that is you need people to be sometimes winning when they open these boosters. But if someone opens they open the chase card of a set, but they open the non-chase version of the card, they're going to feel pretty bad. So previously that 1, 2, or 3 versions of the card meant that the banding of price values across that card was usually a bit more evenly spaced out. The top value is obviously worth the most, the mid value is worth something, the bottom value is still worth something. Now the very, very bottom version of that card is worth nothing, and the rest of the value is spread out, with usually the top one being the only one that's actually worth a lot of money. So you might think, oh, I got the hit, and then you're like, okay, but it's not the good hit, so I don't actually get it. And for a lot of people that becomes the reality, because it takes away from the joy of opening the version of the card. It takes away from the joy of opening the card. It used to be great, I opened X. Now it's great, I opened X, but it's not super rare X. And suddenly the entire opening experience becomes slightly more negative. And the fact is that some of these cards are crazily hard to own. Tell me what you think is better in the comments. I'm genuinely interested. Would you rather have lots of special treatments of cards, but each of those special treatments is worth £20, for example? Or would you rather that be tuned so that special version drops much, much less often from a booster pack and is worth, £300? We had this in Flesh and Blood recently. There's a special version of Rosetta Thorn, which is a weapon in the game. It's an alt art, full art, gold, foiled, really gorgeous piece, right? And you can print it one of 2 ways. You can print it so that card is worth £30 and it's rare, but there's a lot of them. Or you can do what Flesh and Blood chose, where they printed it so it's very rare, and I haven't checked recently, but I saw it going for £250. I think it's above £250 now. So that went from a card that I would love to buy and own and have in my collection for £30 to a card that I haven't actually seen in person, which is weird to say given that I'm a reasonably prolific Flesh and Blood player, and I can't purchase because I could buy an entire meta deck for that price. Now you see what I'm talking about when it comes about tuning the dials and artificial scarcity. For me, that card is in a sweet spot where it's about £30 to £50, because then someone can save up and buy it. When the dial is turned so it's £300 or more, that's too far. There's a whole thing as well about winner exclusive promos that are playable cards, or event exclusive promos that are playable cards. We've had a few of those in Flesh and Blood. I know they exist in One Piece and other stuff. They're just generally a bad idea. Creating such low volumes of a card that can only be won from a certain event, it's just a really bad idea, because if that card is badly balanced and becomes super powerful, then the price will just skyrocket. So you either make them terrible, in which case why are we giving them away, or you make them broken, in which case you've created a monster. So they're always a bad idea. Exclusive cards that can't be purchased or opened in booster packs are always a bad idea. And I've kind of already talked about lack of reprints driving price too high. That's just a problem with tuning the scarcity and why you need to reprint cards at certain times. So how do you spot predatory capitalism in your TCG? And these are the real questions that I say to ask. Do you feel like the rate of products you're being expected to buy is too quick? So you're playing the latest standard in Magic the Gathering or in Flesh and Blood, and you're just constantly being asked to buy products. Does that feel too fast to you? Do you think that someone is always asking you for more money? And if you've been playing for a while, how does what they're asking for you now compare to what they were asking before, when you were happy? Assumedly you were happy with the release schedule before. And do you feel like you're getting the same quality of product that matches what you were getting before? So are you getting it too fast? Is the value the same? And is the quality the same? Those are the three important questions to see whether you are being squeezed for more money without necessarily providing a better quality service. The next question is, are individual cards for the game too highly priced? So are they creating large amounts of artificial scarcity on specific cards to sell boxes to get more money from single sellers and get more money from people mass opening boxes? Because that's also something that could indicate that, you know, a lot of squeezing for your money. Just in general, like, do you feel like you're getting your money's worth? So is lots of money from that company flowing back into you as a consumer in terms of events, organization of things that are going on, enjoyment? Like, do you feel that like you're getting, and maybe it's a weird thing, maybe it's something we've gotten used to that we never really should have expected, but you know, the traditional thing was that they made the game and then they gave you places to play the game. And that's a fair trade, because it's your game and I want to play it. You need to organize where we're going to play it, right? But a lot of the times, you know, that's not happening anymore. So really, you know, you have to ask, am I getting my money's worth? And one of the big problems that like new Kickstarter TCGs, for example, have is they don't have the player base to actually do large-scale organization of events, which means people might buy some boxes and then never actually have a group to play them with, right? And I had this. I saw a really interesting, I can't remember what it's called, but I saw a really interesting designed Kickstarter on Kickstarter TCG. I think I bought a box. Then I realized that no one else around me was buying a box, so I cancelled the pre-order, because I was like, it doesn't matter if I can buy a box and I think it's well designed, because I'll never actually get to play this game. And that kind of happened a bit with Genesis. I really thought Genesis would be an interesting game, and I bought a bit. Someone near me bought a bit, and then, you know, we both got busy and we didn't really get that interested. We played a couple games, and then we didn't really ever kind of play it again, because it was all right, but it was just us playing it, and there were other games where more people were playing it. So like, you really have to say, like, you know, is what that card game's giving me my money's worth as a consumer? And, you know, thinking about Magic the Gathering again, you know, are they organizing enough tournaments near me, or encouraging stores to organize enough tournaments near me? Am I getting enough out of it? And I think that's a really big question, because your expectation from a TCG should be that that company is going out of the way to organize events, a competitive scene. You know, it doesn't have to be like cutthroat, like Pro Tours and stuff like that, but just a way to play the game and some reward for playing it. Because that's marketing spend for them, and it's how you get your friends into the game. And then the other thing to consider is there a lot of FOMO? Is there a lot of cards that you would like to own that are being made unavailable too quickly, or are being printed at very high rarity that you can't afford? You know, the new Secret Layers are a really good example, just because they were a limited print run number, and it was a change from what they did before, so it's very easy to notice. But it could even be more subtle than that. So if you're playing a game where you know, they keep printing one of 500 cards that are all quickly worth £1,000 and you can't afford them. You know, that is a negative experience. And I guarantee you, it has or will lead to you spending more money in the hopes that you will win or get lucky, right? And that is how they are squeezing you for extra money. So that's really just what I want to get to with this video, is ask yourself some of these questions. I believe, and this is one of the firm beliefs of this channel, that no company earns your loyalty forever as a consumer through its actions. Now, there's obviously going to be special cases where they do, but especially with the way the world is now, no trading card game company has your right to blinded loyalty forever just because you've liked it for a long time. And I know that's hard, because I'm as entrenched in Magic as I was when I was 9 years old and got my first set. Still love it, still have my commander decks. And it's been very hard to turn around and say, no, I'm not buying more of X. No, I'm not keeping up with all the Magic things that come out. And to an extent, the same with Flesh and Blood. I was very entrenched in Flesh and Blood. I could build any competitive deck in the game. I could play any class in the game. And recently I've been evaluating the relationship between my money and the game and what's being asked of me to, say, be competitive in the game. And that's led to me selling off large chunks of my collection, certain classes, certain commander decks, just to reevaluate my relationship with trading card games and how much money they demand and how much time they demand, because I feel like their relationship to me has become more predatory. I feel like they're asking more. I feel like they're demanding more money. I feel like they're pushing ahead with their growth and their revenue ahead of what actually makes the game better for me as a player. And I feel like while that continues, the only thing that we can do to actually take the power back is to vote with our wallets and say, this is too much. I'm not staying involved with what you're doing in the same way. So look, that's the end of the discussion. It's a very long video, so I appreciate you sticking with me. You know, if you are someone who is experiencing this, just ask yourself some of these questions. Make sure you're still having fun and you're not just keeping up because you did keep up. And make sure that you're actually getting the value from the TCG that you're buying in a way that continues to enrich your life. And that's what I'm going to leave you with. Thanks for listening. As always, I'm Steel First, Steel First Speaks. Do like and subscribe. Most people who are watching the video are not. You know, I do these kind of videos. I do regular content about Flesh and Blood. I like to do occasional deep dives into the TCG market. If you enjoyed this video, do like and subscribe. If you haven't, drop me a note in the comments. Let me know why. You know, I appreciate this is a difficult topic. So, you know, let's dive into it. Thank you all for listening. Talk to you all very, very soon.